If you saw a billionaire watch his pregnant wife collapse on the street while he stood next to his lover, would you assume his next move would be to save her or to walk away? And if neither, what would you think he was really hiding? There are moments in New York City when time seems to freeze, when the ordinary chaos falls away and everyone holds their breath. On a cloudless Thursday afternoon, as the lunch rush thinned and the city's wealthiest residents strolled along Fifth Avenue, no one could have predicted that today would become the most infamous day in Manhattan society history. Grace Sterling, 7 months pregnant, moved carefully through the crowd, her hand pressed gently against her swollen belly. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair swept into a loose ponytail. She didn't fit in with the parade of designer labels and diamond jewelry that sparkled in the sunlight, but there was a quiet strength in her posture. Her eyes, the deep and thoughtful brown, held the weight of someone who had survived much more than any bystander could ever imagine. Across the street, cameras flashed as a tall, sharply dressed man exited a sleek black town car. Ethan Sterling, her husband, was the kind of billionaire people whispered about. He was known not just for his money, but for the way he commanded a room, intense, magnetic, cold. Today, though, it wasn't just Ethan who attracted attention. On his arm was Alina Chen, a stunning blonde in a blood-red dress, 20-something and radiant. Her laughter echoed off the stone buildings, drawing every eye. In an instant, Grace's world shrank to a pinpoint. She had just left her doctor's office after a routine prenatal checkup. The doctor had smiled, told her the baby was healthy, but Grace's mind had been elsewhere. She felt the pressure of secrets she could barely acknowledge, the gnawing loneliness of a marriage that had become a photo opportunity and nothing more. For weeks, Ethan had been absent, always working late, always traveling for business. Grace had suspected the truth, but seeing him with Alina in public, as if his wife didn't exist, was something different. It was the way Ethan glanced through her that made the humiliation complete. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and Grace saw nothing but calculation behind his perfect, practiced smile. Alina clung to his arm like a trophy. The photographers, always hungry for scandal, snapped picture after picture, already imagining tomorrow's headlines. Billionaire's pregnant wife humiliated on Fifth Avenue. Who is Ethan Sterling's new flame? Grace tried to steady herself, telling herself to keep walking, to ignore the burn in her throat and the sting behind her eyes. But her body betrayed her. The sidewalk seemed to tilt, the noise of the city muffled and distant. She reached out, but there was nothing to grab onto except air. Her knees buckled. A cold sweat broke out across her forehead. In the space of a heartbeat, the world spun and tilted. She was falling. Time slowed. Someone gasped, a sharp, shocked sound. A man in a suit stepped back as if afraid she might touch him. Alina, noticing the commotion, turned her head and smiled. No pity, just satisfaction, as if this collapse was the final proof of her victory. Ethan froze, a look of annoyance flickering across his face. In that instant, Grace knew he wasn't coming to help. He wouldn't reach for her, not here, not in front of his new love and the city's hungry cameras. Grace crumpled to the pavement, her dress gathering around her knees. The cool concrete pressed against her cheek, and for a moment she couldn't move. The pain in her side was sharp. She tried to breathe, tried to gather herself, to remember the advice her mother had once whispered in her ear, "Never let them see you break." But her limbs were heavy, her thoughts scattered. A crowd formed, drawn by the spectacle of a woman. No, not just a woman, but a Sterling, brought low. Some reached for their phones, filming. Others whispered, unsure if they should help or just watch. New York could be both the most compassionate and the cruelest city on earth. And today its gaze was unblinking. Ethan hesitated. That, more than anything, would make headlines the next day. The billionaire, standing over his collapsed wife, looking down as if he didn't recognize her. Alina tugged at his sleeve, urging him onward, but for a split second, Ethan's eyes flickered, not with concern, but with calculation. Would helping her damage his image? Would leaving her show strength or weakness? As the city held its breath, a stranger stepped forward. A middle-aged woman in scrubs, her badge reading Mount Sinai Pediatrics. She knelt by Grace's side, blocking the cameras with her body. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Are you in pain?" The woman's voice was gentle, professional, the first kindness Grace had felt all day. She nodded weakly, one hand still cradling her stomach. "My baby," she whispered, fear making her voice shake. The nurse called out, "Someone call 911, she's pregnant and needs help." That command broke the spell. Another bystander, the young man in a navy suit, put away his phone and started dialing. For the first time, the crowd moved with purpose. Some shielded Grace from the press. Others tried to wave off photographers. Ethan watched, unmoving, his jaw clenched. For a long moment, he was just another man on the street, powerless to control the narrative unfolding in front of him. Then, as sirens wailed in the distance, he took a step back, leaving the nurse and strangers to care for his wife. The cameras caught everything: Grace's collapse, Ethan's indifference, Alina's smirk. By the time the ambulance arrived, the story was already spreading. The billionaire's pregnant wife had fainted on the street, and her husband had turned away. But as the medics lifted Grace onto a stretcher, something shifted inside her. She locked eyes with Ethan, defiance, pain, and the glimmer of something stronger. This would not be the end of her story. Because sometimes when you hit the pavement, you find a kind of strength you never knew you had. Long before Grace Williams ever became Mrs. Sterling, before her name was splashed across tabloids, and before the world cared about her baby bump, she was simply Grace. A girl with fierce dreams, old wounds, and the kind of resilience that only comes from learning early that nobody is coming to save you. That's the truth most people never saw. The girl underneath the pearls and modest smiles, the survivor who learned how to fight for every scrap of happiness. Grace grew up in a rundown section of Boston, in a two-bedroom apartment above a bakery that always smelled like burnt sugar and regret. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Nurse by day, waitress by night, barely home, always tired. Grace's father had vanished when she was 8, leaving behind only a faded photograph and a lifetime's worth of unanswered questions. Her childhood was a series of patched-up hand-me-downs and meals stretched with creativity. But there was love, fierce and stubborn, between mother and daughter, and that was more than some people ever got. As a child, Grace was quiet but bright. She learned to read early, escaping into books whenever her real life felt too hard to handle. She loved stories about brave girls and underdogs, about people who made it out against all odds. She taught herself to cook by watching YouTube videos because she wanted her mother to come home to something warm. She kept her head down in school, never wanting to be noticed for the wrong reasons. When she won her first scholarship, $500 for an essay on courage, her mother cried for a week. "You're going to make it out," she whispered. "You're going to have a better life." Grace believed her, even on the hardest days. She worked part-time jobs all through high school, tutoring, babysitting, cashier at a grocery store, saving every dollar. By the time she turned 18, she had enough for a bus ticket to New York, and just barely enough for the first month's rent on a shared apartment in the Bronx. She left home with 1 suitcase, a second-hand laptop, and a promise to herself: never go back. Life in New York was nothing like the movies. Her first year was a blur of early mornings and late nights, endless cups of gas station coffee, and roommates who partied too loudly. She worked at a bakery, different from her mom's, this one fancier, catering to the Upper East Side crowd. She saw people living lives she could barely imagine: chauffeurs, private schools, children in tiny blazers with their own drivers. Grace worked double shifts, saving every tip. When she wasn't at the bakery, she was at community college, studying business and nonprofit management. She wanted to make something of herself, to prove that being just a girl from Boston was more than enough. She started volunteering at a shelter for runaway teens, helping girls who reminded her a little too much of herself. She learned how to listen, how to organize, how to make a difference, even on a shoestring budget. That was where Ethan first saw her, at a charity dinner for the shelter. Grace was serving punch, a borrowed black dress too tight across her shoulders. She almost spilled a glass when she recognized his face from a magazine. Ethan Sterling, already rich, already famous, walked in with a confidence that filled the room. Their eyes met only briefly. She didn't think he'd remember her, and at first he didn't. But a week later, he came back to the shelter, this time with a check and a smile. "You looked like you could use a friend," he said. Their relationship started quietly. He asked her to coffee. She said no. He tried again, bringing donuts. She laughed, finally relenting. They talked for hours. About books, about growing up poor, about what they wanted from life. Ethan listened in a way that made her feel important, like she was the only person in the room. He never mentioned his money, never showed off. For the first time, Grace let herself believe she could have something special. Months passed. The coffee dates became dinners, then weekend trips. Ethan was careful, attentive, almost shy when he was alone with her. He met her mother, charmed her friends, supported her dreams. When he proposed on a snowy night in Central Park, a single rose and a ring that sparkled like hope, Grace thought she'd finally made it. Not just out of Boston, but out of loneliness, out of fear. Marriage brought its own challenges. The press wanted to know everything. Who is she? They asked. Is she after his money? Grace tried to ignore the whispers, focused on building her nonprofit. She used Ethan's connections to raise funds for foster kids, turning her pain into purpose. The money helped, but Grace never let it define her. She kept her old friends, still cooked dinner herself, still sent half her salary back home to her mother. But the cracks started slowly, almost imperceptibly. Ethan became busier, more distracted. He hired assistants who looked like models, started traveling more for business. At first, Grace trusted him. Why wouldn't she? They had built something together, hadn't they? When she found out she was pregnant, she was terrified but overjoyed. She thought it would bring them closer. She pictured late-night cravings, his hand on her belly, a family. Instead, Ethan pulled away. The loneliness returned, sharper now, because she'd tasted what it was like to be loved. She threw herself into her work, ignoring the warning signs. She tried to convince herself that Ethan was just stressed, that things would get better when the baby came. But as the months passed, his absences grew longer. Her phone filled with photos of him at events, always with Alina. Rumors swirled, but Grace refused to listen. She clung to the hope that the boy from the shelter, the one who brought her donuts, was still in there somewhere. And now, lying in a hospital bed, the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in her ears, Grace remembered every step that brought her here. She was more than the scandal, more than the wife, more than the pain. She was still that girl from Boston, and she still had something left to fight for. Ethan Sterling wasn't just a billionaire. He was Manhattan's most sought-after, most envied, and most hated power player. People said he had a golden touch, but what he really had was a heart honed for winning and a mind made for war. If you searched the city's skyline, you could see his ambition written in glass and steel, his name engraved at the top of more than one tower. His rise was the kind of story the city loved. Son of old money, sure, but he'd tripled the Sterling fortune by 35, outmaneuvering everyone who tried to stand in his way. He didn't think of himself as cruel. He saw himself as efficient. To Ethan, life was a game of chess, and he never hesitated to sacrifice a pawn to protect his king. Everything about him was calculated. The way he smiled for the cameras, the way he paused just long enough at charity galas for the perfect photograph, the way he could charm a room and silence a boardroom with a single look. He wore success like a second skin, but there was always something cold, something unreachable, just beneath the surface. For a time, Grace had been his sanctuary, someone real in a world of deals and power plays. She didn't care about his money. She challenged him, grounded him, made him feel almost normal. But as the years passed and the demands of his empire grew, Ethan found himself drifting. It started with late nights, then long weekends away. The city had a way of swallowing time, and Ethan, ever hungry, let it consume him. Into this world came Alina Chen. At first, she was just another face in the crowd. Young, beautiful, clever, but with an edge that drew him in. She wasn't like Grace, who listened more than she spoke. Alina was fire, all laughter and challenge, a whirlwind of energy. She was the type of woman who knew how to be seen, and she made being with Ethan feel less like a responsibility and more like a thrill. Their affair started as a secret, just as all scandals do. The first encounter was at a black-tie benefit for tech entrepreneurs. Alina, an up-and-coming art gallery curator, caught Ethan's eye from across the room. She was wearing a crimson dress, hair swept back, talking animatedly with a crowd of investors. When she laughed, heads turned. When Ethan introduced himself, she didn't flinch or fawn. She simply asked if he knew anything about Monet. He lied and said yes. She saw through him and laughed again. One drink became two. By midnight, they were on the rooftop, looking out over the city lights. Alina told him she loved danger. Ethan told her he loved a challenge. She kissed him first. The rest, as the tabloids say, was inevitable. But it wasn't just sex. With Alina, Ethan felt alive in a way he hadn't for years. She challenged his decisions, teased him about his billionaire brooding, and made jokes about being his dangerous little secret. He convinced himself that he deserved this excitement, that Grace, with her kindness and quiet loyalty, would never understand. And maybe she wouldn't. But Ethan was too far gone to care. He began to flaunt Alina, not just in private, but in public. He brought her to lunch at places where photographers always lingered, paraded her into charity galas meant for families, even let her sit in his box at Madison Square Garden. It became a game to him. How far could he push before people started whispering in earnest? How much could he get away with before Grace noticed? When the whispers began, Ethan didn't deny them. He relished them. Behind closed doors, Grace was becoming a ghost in her own home. Ethan barely spoke to her, barely noticed her swelling belly or the ache in her voice when she asked if he would be home for dinner. When she finally confronted him, one quiet evening after another solo prenatal class, he simply shrugged. "We're both adults, Grace. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Grace asked if he loved Alina. He didn't answer. Instead, he left for a business dinner, not returning until the next morning. It was a new kind of cruelty, one that didn't leave bruises but left scars just as deep. Grace stopped asking questions. She moved through the penthouse like a shadow, holding herself together for the baby growing inside her. Meanwhile, Ethan's life with Alina became the main show. She relished the attention, the gifts, the headlines. She played her part, always perfectly dressed, always perfectly dangerous. To Alina, Ethan's marriage was just an obstacle, one that would be swept away in time. She whispered promises in his ear, about new beginnings, about being the woman he really needed. She had no intention of settling for second place. But what neither of them realized was that the city, with its bright lights and endless appetite for drama, was always watching. The cracks in Ethan's perfect world were beginning to show. Investors whispered about his judgment. Friends dropped off one by one. His mother called, warning him that these things never end well. He ignored them all. He had everything he wanted, he told himself. And yet, late at night, lying beside Alina in a suite overlooking the skyline, Ethan sometimes caught himself staring into the darkness, haunted by the memory of Grace's eyes. Soft, wounded, too full of love for a man who no longer deserved it. On the afternoon, Grace fainted on Fifth Avenue. Ethan had convinced himself it was just another bump in the road, something to be managed and forgotten. But as the cameras flashed and his wife collapsed on the sidewalk, he felt a crack deep inside him, something small but undeniable. For a split second, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he had gone too far. He didn't know it yet, but everything he thought controlled was already slipping away. The sound of sirens echoed down Fifth Avenue as Grace lay on the pavement, consciousness slipping in and out like waves against a battered shore. All around her, the city buzzed with curiosity and hunger. Bystanders snapped photos, their faces a blur of concern, judgment, and morbid fascination. No one knew what to do, not really. Everyone wanted to help, until they realized just who was at the center of this storm. "Isn't that Ethan Sterling's wife?" whispered a woman with a silk scarf, her hand hovering over her phone as if the screen might bite her. "The pregnant one?" Another bystander, a young guy with designer headphones, leaned in, filming with the nonchalance of someone who'd grown up seeing celebrities as fair game. "She just went down, man. That billionaire didn't even look twice." Within seconds, social media exploded. Photos of Grace, her blue dress tangled, her eyes closed, a hand protectively on her belly, were everywhere. One tweet read, "Sterling's wife faints as he strolls with new girlfriend. Is this the end of Manhattan's golden couple?" The hashtag Sterling scandal began to trend. Ethan, meanwhile, stood frozen on the curb, Alina at his side. For a split second, he looked like a man trapped between two worlds, the reality of a wife in distress and the unreality of the public eye. Alina squeezed his arm a little tighter, her painted lips twitching in a smile meant only for him. "Let's go," she murmured, low enough that only he could hear. "She'll be fine. You don't want this mess on camera, do you?" Ethan hesitated. Somewhere deep inside an old part of him, a part he'd tried to bury, wanted to rush to Grace, to hold her, to at least kneel at her side and pretend he cared. But the newer Ethan, the one who had learned to see life as strategy, knew the optics were everything. He couldn't risk looking weak, couldn't risk feeding the narrative of the betrayed, desperate husband. That was never his brand. So he chose Alina. He let himself be guided away, sliding into the back seat of his town car as the world's eyes followed him. Grace's name echoed in the city's canyons, first as a whisper, then as a shout. Inside the car, Ethan stared out the window, the city's chaos blurring into a smear of color and light. Alina pulled out her phone, scrolling through the coverage with a giddy excitement. "You're all over page 6, she said, laughing. "They're calling her your tragic wife. Isn't it wild? They'll forget about her in a week. This is New York, Ethan. The world loves a winner." He didn't answer. He couldn't. There was something about the sight of Grace, crumpled, vulnerable, alone, that lingered behind his eyes, even as Alina tried to distract him with kisses and promises. For the first time in months, Ethan felt unsure. Had he really become this man? Was this what winning looked like? Back on the street, Grace's world was reduced to fragments. She heard voices, felt hands lifting her gently onto a stretcher, the metallic tang of oxygen and the relentless click of camera shutters. The nurse from Mount Sinai leaned close, brushing a stray hair from Grace's forehead. "You're safe now. We've got you. Just breathe, sweetheart. Your baby's heartbeat is strong." The ambulance doors slammed shut, muting the outside world. Inside, Grace stared up at the ceiling, her mind racing. All the things she'd wanted to say to Ethan, pleas, accusations, confessions, died on her tongue. For a moment, she let herself mourn. For the man she'd loved, for the family she'd imagined, for the public image she could never control. As the ambulance pulled away, a reporter managed to snap one last photo. Grace's face, pale but defiant, her eyes wide open. The image would make the front page the next morning. But for Grace, the humiliation was complete even before the story broke. She'd been left on the ground, not by a stranger, but by the man who had once promised her the world. At the hospital, doctors ran tests, checked her baby's heartbeat, and assured her she would be fine. "You fainted from a combination of stress and low blood sugar," they told her, voices gentle. "You need rest, support, and less stress." Grace nodded, thanking them. But she barely heard their words. Her phone, resting on the table beside her bed, buzzed endlessly. Friends, family, reporters, even strangers offering support or prying for gossip. She ignored them all, turning the screen face down. The first visitor allowed in was not Ethan, not even her own mother. It was a lawyer from the Sterling family office, a man in a gray suit with cold eyes and a folder full of arrangements. He offered her a quiet settlement, a recommendation to keep this private, and a request to refrain from public statements. Grace stared at the contract, her stomach twisting. She realized finally what Ethan's inaction meant. He wasn't coming. Not today, not ever. She had become a liability, a problem to be solved with money and silence. The woman she'd been, the hopeful wife, the girl from Boston, the dreamer, was gone. All that was left was a mother, a survivor, and a woman whose humiliation had been witnessed by the world. For the first time, Grace didn't cry. Instead, something cold and steady settled inside her. She asked the lawyer to leave. She closed her eyes, thinking of her baby, thinking of the stories she'd once loved. She remembered every time life had tried to break her, and every time she'd gotten back up. This time, the world had seen her fall. Next time, they would see her rise. Night in the hospital was a different kind of quiet, hushed, antiseptic, the hum of machines and the distant shuffle of nurses' shoes. Grace lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling tiles, her hand resting protectively on her belly. Every so often, the baby kicked, a flutter that was both comfort and reminder. She was still here. They both were. But the world outside was brutal. The humiliation from Fifth Avenue replayed in her mind in looping, endless detail. The way Ethan had looked at her, the sting of Alina's smirk, the strangers filming as she fell. She had never felt so exposed, so utterly alone. Every headline that flooded her phone the next morning made it worse. Grace Sterling faints in public meltdown. Sterling's wife, victim or problem? Is the Sterling marriage over? Each article twisted the knife deeper, reducing her heartbreak to tabloid fodder. Her mother called, voice trembling. "Grace, baby, please come home. You don't have to do this alone." Grace tried to sound strong, but there was a hollow ache in her voice that wouldn't go away. "I'll be okay, Mom," she lied, forcing a smile. "The doctors say the baby's fine. I just need some rest." She couldn't tell her mother the truth. She couldn't tell anyone. Her only friend left in the city, Janine, a nurse she'd met at a charity gala, back when she was still invited to such things, visited after her shift, bringing coffee and gossip. "You know, people keep asking about you at the hospital. Even Dr. Patel said she saw you on the news. Everyone wants to know if it's really as bad as it looks." Grace forced a laugh. "It's worse," she said, and Janine's face fell. "I'm sorry, Grace. You didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve you." Janine squeezed her hand, warmth in her eyes. "If you want to disappear, just say the word. I'll smuggle you out of here myself." But Grace shook her head. "I can't run. Not now. Not until I know what I'm going to do." That was the truth of it. She had no plan. For the first time in her life, she felt powerless. Her career was on hold, her marriage in ruins, her future uncertain. She replayed Ethan's cold indifference, the settlement offer, and wondered how it had come to this. How had she lost herself? When had she stopped fighting for what she wanted, what she deserved? And then, late that night, her phone vibrated. At first, she ignored it. She couldn't face another headline, another empty message. But something made her reach for it anyway. The screen showed a text from an unknown number. "You're stronger than you think. Don't let them bury you. Call me if you want the truth. A friend." Grace stared at the message, heart pounding. Who would send this? Was it a reporter? A prank? Or something else? She considered ignoring it, but the words clung to her mind. The truth. What truth? She knew about the affair, the betrayal. What more was there to know? She lay awake for hours, mind racing, staring into the dark. The hospital felt colder, emptier. But the message lingered, a splinter of hope, or maybe fear. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering, "We're going to be okay, little one. I promise." The next morning, Grace was released from the hospital. Janine picked her up, handing her a pair of oversized sunglasses and a scarf. "You look like a movie star in hiding," Janine joked. Grace smiled weakly, grateful for the disguise. Outside, reporters waited, their questions like bullets. "Grace, will you forgive Ethan? Is it true about the divorce? What will you do now?" She said nothing, letting Janine guide her to the car. They drove in silence for a few blocks before Grace spoke. "Do you think people can ever really know each other, Janine? Or do we all just play parts?" Janine's answer was quick. "You know who you are. That's all that matters. You're more than his wife. You're more than any headline. Don't let them make you forget that." Back at her apartment, Grace finally let herself cry. She thought about the girl she used to be, the fighter, the survivor, the one who never let anyone define her. She remembered why she'd fallen in love with Ethan. His kindness, his attention, his belief in her. She remembered the nights they'd planned a future together, before money and power warped everything. She realized, in a flash of clarity, that her story wasn't over. It couldn't be. She still had secrets of her own. There were parts of her past she'd never shared with Ethan, connections she'd made before she became Mrs. Sterling, favors she was owed, people who knew the real Grace. Maybe it was time to remember who she really was. She scrolled through her phone, looking for the anonymous message. Her finger hovered over call. 1,000 doubts rushed in. Was it a trap? Did she even want to know the truth? But something deep inside pushed her forward. The same stubborn spark that had carried her out of Boston, through college, through every setback. She dialed the number. It rang twice before someone answered, a woman's voice, low and confident. "Grace, I was hoping you'd call." Grace swallowed. "Who is this?" A pause. "A friend. Someone who knows what Ethan's really been up to. Someone who wants to help you fight back." 1,000 questions burned on Grace's tongue, but the only one that came out was, "Why?" The woman's answer was immediate. "Because you're not the only one he's hurt, and because women like us, we don't stay down." Grace felt a shiver run through her, half fear, half hope. Maybe she wasn't alone after all. Maybe her story wasn't just about loss, but about finding her voice again. Maybe it was time to fight, not just for herself, but for the life growing inside her. As she ended the call, Grace felt something shift inside her. Resolve, cold and sharp like steel forged in fire. Ethan had humiliated her in front of the world, but he had no idea who he was really dealing with. This was just the beginning. Grace Sterling sat alone in her small apartment, sunlight pouring through half-closed blinds, dust motes swirling in the golden air. It was quiet except for the distant hum of city traffic and the tiny, reassuring thump of her baby's heartbeat that she could still almost feel within her. Gone were the reporters outside her door. Gone was the parade of well-meaning but shallow texts from people who had only cared about the Sterling name. In the stillness, Grace realized something. The humiliation, the pain, the isolation, none of it had broken her. Instead, it had burned away the illusions, leaving behind only the truth of who she was. That truth was what the stranger on the phone had spoken to. Grace replayed their conversation in her mind. The voice had been steady, confident, unmistakably female, a woman who had seen the same darkness Grace now faced. "You're not alone," she had said. "He's hurt more people than you know. But I know where the bodies are buried. Are you ready to fight back?" At first, Grace had hesitated. Was she really ready for war? All her life, she had avoided confrontation, choosing peace over pride, forgiveness over vengeance. But now, looking at her reflection in the apartment window, she barely recognized the woman staring back. This woman was not defeated. She was not weak. She was a mother, a survivor, and somewhere deep down, she was still a fighter. Grace made her decision. She texted the stranger, whose name she soon learned was Rebecca Tran. Rebecca had once worked for Ethan, a senior analyst at Sterling Tech, smart and fearless. She had been forced out when she threatened to expose financial irregularities, blacklisted in her industry by Ethan's ruthless PR team. "I lost everything because I wouldn't play along," Rebecca explained over coffee in a quiet Brooklyn cafe. "I've watched him destroy people's lives. I wasn't the first, and you weren't the last. But together, we might be the end." For the next week, Grace and Rebecca became allies, then friends. Rebecca showed Grace how to gather evidence: emails, bank statements, contracts hidden under dummy corporations. Grace realized she still had connections. Her old college roommate worked in city government. A donor from her nonprofit days ran a successful cybersecurity firm. She called in every favor, cashed every chip she had left. Slowly, a plan took shape. Grace didn't want money. She wanted freedom, and more than that, she wanted the truth to come out. With Rebecca's help, she built a case that would not only destroy Ethan's image but protect herself and her unborn child. They documented everything: evidence of affairs, fraud, illegal lobbying. They collected screenshots, made copies, stored digital files off-site in case anything mysterious happened to Grace's apartment. As the days passed, Grace transformed. She traded her loose, understated dresses for tailored blazers and smart shoes. She cut her hair, short and sharp, letting go of the soft image Ethan had always preferred. She began walking taller, speaking with more certainty, refusing to let anyone talk down to her, especially not Ethan's lawyers, who continued to send veiled threats and pitiful settlement offers. One afternoon, while sorting documents with Rebecca, Grace's phone rang. It was her mother, who hadn't stopped worrying since the hospital. "I saw you on the news again, baby. Are you sure you're all right?" Grace smiled, something proud and fierce in her eyes. "I'm okay, Mom. Actually, I think I'm better than okay. I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "That's my girl. Just promise me you won't let him take anything else from you." "I won't," Grace promised. "Not ever again." Meanwhile, Ethan was beginning to sense that something was wrong. Alina, once endlessly supportive, became impatient and jealous as public sympathy shifted to Grace. Investors began asking questions about the scandal. The board of Sterling Tech requested a private meeting. Ethan grew irritable, snappish, blaming everyone but himself for the growing crisis. One evening, as Ethan returned to his penthouse, he found a package waiting for him. Inside were copies of the documents Grace and Rebecca had compiled, proof of financial crimes, betrayal, and a letter in Grace's handwriting. "You taught me to fight, Ethan. I'm not afraid anymore. This time, I'm not alone." He read the letter twice, his face white with rage. He called Grace in a fury, but for the first time, she didn't answer. She didn't need to. The power had shifted, and everyone knew it. Word spread quickly through Manhattan's elite. Grace Sterling, once the silent, overlooked wife, had become a force to be reckoned with. People who had once pitied her now admired her. Women reached out with stories of their own, inspired by her courage. Her old nonprofit began trending online, flooded with donations. The media, always hungry for a new narrative, dubbed her the comeback queen. But the real victory was quieter. At night, Grace sat by her window, hands on her belly, feeling her baby move. She spoke softly to the child growing inside her. "I want you to know your mother never gave up," she whispered. "No matter what happened, I found a way to stand up again." As the day of the Sterling Foundation Gala approached, the same event where Grace had once been expected to stand by Ethan's side, smiling quietly for the cameras, Grace felt no fear. She was ready for whatever would come next. She had rebuilt herself, stronger and wiser. She wasn't alone, and she was no longer afraid. Whatever Ethan did next, it would be her turn to write the story. The Sterling Foundation Gala was Manhattan's annual spectacle of wealth, power, and self-congratulation. This year, with the city's attention fixed on Ethan Sterling's scandal, the stakes were higher than ever. The ballroom of the Grand St. Clair Hotel glimmered beneath 100 crystal chandeliers. Waiters in white gloves glided between tables, serving champagne to the city's most influential players, politicians, investors, and society's most famous faces. Everyone buzzed about what would happen tonight. Ethan stood by the stage, tense in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. The last week had been a nightmare. Board members had called him at all hours, investors demanded reassurance, and the press hounded him and Alina everywhere. Alina herself had grown distant, her usual charm replaced with anxiety. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" she'd whispered before they left the penthouse, adjusting her diamond bracelet with trembling hands. Ethan set his jaw. "We have to show strength. They want to see us beaten, but I won't give them the satisfaction." Still, as the room filled with familiar faces, Ethan felt a chill. There were whispers. Too many, too loud. Every time someone glanced his way, he saw pity in their eyes, or worse, barely concealed satisfaction at his fall from grace. It was the first time in his life he had felt truly vulnerable. For the first time, he wondered if all his power, all his wealth, could actually save him. Just then, a hush swept across the ballroom. The doors at the far end opened, and a figure appeared on the marble steps. All heads turned. For a second, no one recognized her. The woman who entered was transformed. Grace Sterling. Radiant and unbroken, in a midnight blue gown that shimmered with every step. Her hair, now cut in a sleek bob, framed her face with elegant defiance. At her side was Rebecca Tran, poised and confident, projecting the quiet authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. The crowd's gasp was audible. The music faltered. Someone, an old friend of Grace's from her nonprofit days, stood up in applause, breaking the spell. Others followed, clapping awkwardly, unsure of the rules. Grace walked in, not as a victim, but as a queen reclaiming her throne. Ethan felt his heart seize. For the first time since the scandal began, he saw Grace as something unfamiliar, a threat. Grace didn't hesitate. She moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, pausing to greet the foundation's biggest donors, exchanging warm hugs and firm handshakes. She was more than just Ethan's wife tonight. She was a symbol. Women in the room, many of whom had their own secret scars, found themselves rooting for her, even as the men whispered about legal settlements and power plays. The MC took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special announcement before dinner," he began. "Mrs. Grace Sterling has asked for a moment to speak." Ethan felt a wave of dread. He tried to intercept her, but Rebecca blocked his path, meeting his eyes with cool determination. "Let her speak, Ethan. It's time." Grace took the stage, her hands steady, her eyes scanning the faces before her. "Thank you," she began, her voice strong. "Thank you all for being here tonight. I know there's been a lot of speculation about my family, about my marriage, and about who I am. Tonight, I want to share the truth. Not because I want sympathy, but because I believe in the power of honesty, and I believe in the strength of every woman who has ever been told to be silent." There was a ripple through the crowd. Uneasy, electric. Grace continued. "For years, I supported this foundation because I believe in its mission, to help the most vulnerable among us. I stand here not as someone who needs saving, but as someone who has learned the cost of silence. Many of you know my husband, Ethan Sterling, as a generous philanthropist, a leader, a visionary. But that's not the whole story. She glanced at Ethan, then back to the audience. Behind the headlines, there was betrayal. Not just the affair, not just the public humiliation, but something worse, a campaign to silence me, to threaten, to use power as a weapon. When I fell on that sidewalk, I thought my life was over. But I was wrong. That was the moment I remembered who I am, and who I refuse to become. Whispers grew. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded in silent support. "I am not alone," Grace said, and Rebecca stepped forward holding up a thick folder. "Together with people who believed in me, I gathered the evidence, emails, contracts, hidden accounts, that tell the real story of how Sterling Tech treated its employees, covered up wrongdoing, and tried to buy silence. Tonight, this evidence will go not just to the Foundation's board, but to the authorities and to the press." A collective gasp. Flashbulbs popped as journalists in the crowd took photos. Ethan started forward, voice tight. "Grace, stop. You don't know what you're doing." Grace cut him off, her voice ringing with steel. "No, Ethan. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm taking back my voice. I'm making sure our son grows up knowing his mother stood up for what was right, no matter what it cost." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, one by one, the crowd began to applaud. At first hesitant, then louder, as people realized the power of what they were witnessing. A woman refusing to be destroyed, using the truth as her sword. Alina, standing alone at the back, melted away, her face pale, realizing the game was over. Ethan stared at Grace, a mix of rage and regret battling in his eyes. But he knew, in that instant, that he had lost. Not just his reputation or his company, but the one person who had ever truly loved him. As the applause thundered through the ballroom, Grace stepped down, meeting Rebecca's embrace. For the first time, she felt free. The morning after the gala, New York awoke to a city transformed. News of Grace Sterling's public stand dominated headlines and talk shows, filling screens with images of her poised, defiant face. The words she'd spoken, about betrayal, power, and refusing to be silent, spread like wildfire, sparking conversations in offices, coffee shops, and homes. "Did you hear what she did?" People whispered with a mix of awe and admiration. For the first time, Grace was seen not as a victim, but as a woman who had reclaimed her story. Grace watched it all unfold from the quiet of her living room, her newborn son sleeping in her arms. The apartment was small, but filled with warmth and light, a far cry from the cold luxury of the Sterling penthouse. Sunlight played on the walls as she rocked her baby, the world's noise softened by the gentle rhythm of his breath. She had lost almost everything in material terms, but in her heart, she felt richer than she ever had in her entire life. Rebecca came by, her arms full of fresh flowers and newspapers. "You're everywhere, you know," she teased, dropping onto the couch. "You broke the internet. The whole board at Sterling Tech resigned this morning. The authorities are investigating. And do you know what else? You inspired people. I've gotten a dozen emails already from women who say your speech gave them the courage to finally speak up." Grace smiled, her eyes misty with gratitude and exhaustion. "I never wanted to be famous, Rebecca. I just didn't want to be invisible." "You're not invisible anymore," Rebecca said. "You're a symbol now, and you did it with truth, not revenge." There were tough days ahead. Ethan would fight in court. Lawyers would argue over custody, finances, and reputation. There would be more headlines, some supportive, some cruel. Alina would try to sell her story. There would be betrayals, threats, and lonely nights when Grace would question if she had the strength to keep going. But Grace had changed. She was no longer the woman who crumbled in the face of public scorn or hid from the camera's gaze. She was no longer just someone's wife, or just a mother, or just a headline. She was herself, brave, resourceful, wounded, but unbroken. Soon, she accepted a new role as the director of the Sterling Foundation, voted in by a new board, determined to make things right. Her first act was to redirect millions of dollars from lavish parties and image campaigns to programs for women and children in crisis. She visited shelters, spoke at schools, and started a podcast sharing real stories of women who rose from impossible odds. The support was overwhelming. Donors flocked to the cause, and the city's most influential women joined her mission. One afternoon, as Grace wrapped up a meeting at the foundation, a girl no older than 19 lingered at the edge of the conference room. "Excuse me, Mrs. Sterling," she stammered. "I just wanted to say thank you. I grew up in foster care. For a long time, I thought people like us just disappeared. But last night, you made me believe I could be something more." Grace hugged her, eyes shining. "You already are something more. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And if you ever need help, this door is always open." With every letter she received, every woman who stepped forward, Grace felt the ripple effect of her choice. Her story had become more than her own. It was a beacon for every person who'd been silenced or dismissed, every mother who'd had to be stronger than she thought possible, every woman who had been told to wait quietly for rescue that never came. Meanwhile, Ethan's empire crumbled. The authorities pressed charges, his fortune was split, and his social calendar emptied. For the first time, the world saw him not as the untouchable billionaire, but as a man who'd lost everything through arrogance and neglect. Some pitied him, but most simply moved on. The city had found a new hero to root for. One night, as the city lights blinked outside her window, Grace spoke to her son, her voice soft and full of hope. "You won't remember any of this, little one," she whispered, "but I hope you'll grow up knowing that you're loved, that your mom never stopped fighting for you, and that no matter what happens, we get to decide what kind of people we become." She tucked him into his crib and looked at her own reflection in the window. She saw strength in her own eyes, something that could never be bought or broken. To the world, she became a headline, Grace Sterling, the woman who wouldn't be broken. To those who loved her, she was simply Grace. A mother, a leader, a survivor. In her first podcast episode, she shared the lesson she wished someone had told her long ago. No woman is weak just because she's been hurt. The strongest thing you can do is stand up, again and again, no matter who tries to keep you down. Don't let anyone write your story for you. Take the pen back. You're not a side character in someone else's legend. You're the main event. The message went viral, striking a chord far beyond New York. Messages poured in from around the world, from women and men, young and old, all echoing the same thing. "Thank you. I see myself in your story." Grace's life was still hard. She still missed what she'd lost. There were days when her confidence wavered, when she doubted if she could be enough. But every morning, she chose to get up, to keep writing, to keep fighting, for herself, for her son, and for every woman who would come after her. As the screen faded to black and the music swelled, one line echoed above all: "Don't ever underestimate a woman who refuses to be silent." Grace's story wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about the power of standing up, no matter how many times you've been knocked down. And for millions watching, it was a call to write their own comeback, no matter where or how their story began. So the story has ended. And our wonderful friends, are you still here with me until now? If something in this story touched your heart, then maybe it's a sign you're ready to look at your own struggles with new eyes. Healing isn't about pretending we're unbreakable. It's about refusing to stay broken. As heterodox wisdom reminds us, the wound is the place where the light enters you. Let's remember, real power comes from standing up for yourself even when no one expects you to. If Grace could rise, so can you. If you feel this message, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Comment below about the moment you found your own inner strength. You never know who you might inspire.
She was Ilara Hayes, a name that used to mean something. Now she was just an ex-wife cast out of the New York County Supreme Court with nothing but the designer clothes on her back, clothes her billionaire husband had bought her. He kept the $200 million penthouse. He kept the Hamptons estate. He kept her dignity. As the rain hammered down, Ilara walked out alone, a pariah in a $1,000 suit. But just as her world was ending, a black Rolls-Royce Cullinan sliced through the rain. The door opened. A man she'd never met looked out, not with pity, but with calculation. His name was Julian St. Clair. And he didn't just own a jet. He owned the sky she was about to fly in. The gavel strike was a concussion. It didn't just end the hearing, it ended a life. Ilara Hayes. No, the court had just reaffirmed she was legally Ilara Hayes, again stood frozen. The sterile wood-paneled courtroom of the New York County Supreme Court felt like it was shrinking around her. The court finds in favor of the petitioner, Mr. Thorne. The prenuptial agreement signed November 4, 2015 is hereby upheld in its entirety. Her lawyer, a man from Sullivan and Cromwell, whose billing rate was higher than her monthly allowance had been, didn't even flinch. He just quietly packed his monogrammed leather briefcase. He'd warned her. He'd told her Marcus Thorne's legal team was an iron wall. Marcus, seated 20 feet away, didn't look at her. He never did not anymore. He was busy checking his Patek Philippe, a Nautilus, the one she'd bought him for their 5th anniversary. He adjusted the knot of his Tom Ford tie and gave his lawyer, the infamous Shark Shapiro, a curt, satisfied nod. The verdict was a public execution. Alara was entitled to nothing. Not the penthouse on Central Park South, not the waterfront property in the Hamptons, not a single piece of the art she had so carefully curated for their collection. The prenup, which she had signed in a haze of love and trust, was a masterpiece of legal cruelty. It had an infidelity clause with a morality provision so vague that her public disagreement with him at a charity gala was cited as a breach of spousal duty. She was the difficult wife, the ungrateful gold digger. The narrative had been set by Marcus's PR team months ago, plastered across the New York Post and page 6. "Ms. Hayes," her lawyer said, his voice flat, "we're done here." She walked out of the courtroom on autopilot. The Christian Louboutin heels, a congratulations on the divorce gift to herself, bought on the last dregs of her credit, clicked hollowly on the marble floor. The sound was a countdown to her new life. A life of nothing. The hallway was a different kind of war zone. Marcus was swarmed by reporters. He played the part of the grieving, benevolent victor. This was never about money. He lied smoothly, his voice resonating with false sincerity. It was about principle. I wish Alara the best. I truly hope she finds the help she needs. The help she needs. He made her sound unstable. The reporters glanced at her, a predator's fleeting interest, but she was old news. The loser. She pushed through the heavy doors and into the gray, unforgiving rain of a New York afternoon. The rain was instant, soaking her silk blouse and matting her hair. She'd come in a car service. She would be leaving in, she wasn't sure. Her friends, the wives of Marcus's partners, the socialites she'd lunched with at Balthazar, had evaporated. Her phone, once a symphony of pings, was silent. She stood under the meager protection of the portico, a statue of failure. The city moved on around her. Taxis splashed yellow streaks through the street, all of them occupied. She shivered, the cold seeping into her bones. This was it, the absolute 0 point of her life. Then a vehicle pulled up to the curb, displacing a river of water. It didn't just park. It arrived. A high-gloss, black-on-black Rolls-Royce Cullinan. The windows were so dark they looked like polished obsidian. A man in a suit that was clearly Savile Row, bespoke, simple, sharp, and terrifyingly expensive, stepped out from the driver's side. He didn't rush with an umbrella. He simply walked to the rear passenger door and opened it. He looked directly at her, not at the crowd, not at Marcus, who was still holding court on the steps. At her. Alara recoiled, assuming it was a mistake. Maybe it was for Marcus. The man, built like a linebacker with the face of a diplomat, took 3 purposeful strides toward her. He stopped a respectful 5 feet away. "Ms. Hayes." His voice was a low baritone, professional and unhurried. "Mr. St. Clair invites you to join him." Alara blinked, the rain dripping from her eyelashes. I think you have the wrong person." "Alara Hayes, recently divorced from Marcus Thorne. You are the correct person," the man said. His name, she would learn, was Graves. "The car is warm. It's much better than the rain." She looked back at the courthouse steps. Marcus had just spotted the Rolls-Royce. His smile faltered. A flash of confusion, no annoyance, crossed his face. Who was muscling in on his victory? Alara looked back at the open door of the Cullinan. She could see nothing inside its plush, dark interior. She had 2 options: stay and be humiliated further by her ex-husband, or get into a car with a total stranger. "Who is Mr. St. Clair?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He's the man offering you a ride out of the rain," Graves replied. She looked at Marcus one last time. He was watching her, his eyes narrowed. That small act of defiance cemented it. She took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and walked past Graves into the car. The door closed with a heavy, soundless thunk, sealing off the world. The smell of rich leather and something clean like bergamot filled her senses. It was silent. The chaos of the city was gone. A man sat opposite her. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was looking at her. He was perhaps 40, with sharp, intelligent eyes the color of steel. His black hair was perfectly cut. He wore a simple dark blue quarter-zip sweater. She recognized it as Loro Piana, and tailored trousers. No tie, no flashy watch. He exuded an aura of such profound wealth that it made Marcus's look theatrical. Marcus played at being rich. This man simply was. "Ms. Hayes," he said. His voice was calm with a transatlantic accent. "My apologies for the unconventional invitation. You looked like you needed an extraction." "Where are we going?" Ilara asked, her heart hammering. "Teterboro," the man said as the car pulled seamlessly into traffic. Ilara's blood ran cold. Teterboro was the private airport. I don't have a passport." The man permitted himself a small, thin smile. "You won't need one. We're flying to my estate in the Adirondacks. It's domestic." He leaned forward slightly. "My name is Julian St. Clair, and I've been watching your ex-husband, for a very long time. I think you and I have a great deal to discuss." The 20-minute drive to Teterboro Airport was spent in a weighted silence. Ilara, still damp, sat on the buttery soft leather of the Rolls-Royce, her mind trying to catch up. Julian St. Clair simply watched the rain-lashed scenery of the FDR Drive as if he had all the time in the world. He didn't ask her questions. He didn't offer platitudes. He just waited. Graves drove the Cullinan directly onto the tarmac, pulling up beside a machine that made Ilara's breath catch. It was a Gulfstream G650ER. Not a small Learjet, not a chartered puddle jumper. This was the pinnacle of private aviation, a sleek pearl-white Spear capable of flying from New York to Hong Kong without stopping. On the tail, a simple, elegant logo, a stylized S. "This way," Julian said as Graves opened her door. An attendant was waiting with a large umbrella. Ilara walked up the steps and into the cabin. It was not the party jet Marcus had sometimes chartered with its garish chrome and mirrored ceilings. This was a flying boardroom, a study in quiet luxury. Cream leather, dark walnut paneling, and brushed bronze fixtures. The air was warm. A flight attendant dressed in an elegant navy blue suit took Ilara's damp blazer. "Please sit," Julian gestured to a club chair. "Would you like some tea, or perhaps something stronger? I find a Macallan 18 is an excellent antidote to a bad day." "Tea. Just tea, please," Ilara murmured. As the jet began its powerful, seamless taxi to the runway, Julian finally spoke. "Marcus Thorne," he said, taking a seat opposite her. "He's a parasite who's convinced the world he's a king. He built his entire empire, Thorne Industries, on a lie." Ilara stiffened. "If you're looking for me to violate my NDA..." Julian laughed. It wasn't a kind sound. "Ms. Hayes, that NDA is a paper shield. It's designed to protect him from you, a single, broke, and emotionally devastated woman. It was not designed to protect him from me." He leaned in, his steel-gray eyes pinning her. "Tell me, in your 10 years of marriage, did Marcus ever mention a man named Arthur Vance?" Ilara frowned. "No, I don't think so." "He wouldn't have," Julian said. "Arthur Vance was my father." The jet noise faded into the background. "I don't understand," Ilara said. "My father was a brilliant software engineer. 20 years ago, he developed a logistics algorithm, a piece of code that could revolutionize global shipping. He called it Helios. He needed a partner with capital, someone to sell it. He found a young, hungry, charismatic partner. That man's name was Marcus Thorne. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. Marcus didn't just have capital. Julian continued, his voice dangerously soft. He had a plan. He convinced my father to sign over the intellectual property to a joint holding company. Then, using a series of shell corporations, Marcus diluted my father's shares to zero and locked him out. He stole the company, the code, and the credit. He renamed Helios to Thorne Logistics, and it became the foundation of his entire empire. My father, he fought him in court, but Marcus had better lawyers. He buried my father in paperwork and debt. Arthur Vance died of a heart attack 6 months later, completely penniless. I was 19. Alara was speechless. The man she had married, she knew he was ruthless, but this was monstrous. I've spent the last 20 years building my own world, Julian said, gesturing around the cabin. I didn't just want to get rich, Ms. Hayes. I wanted to get powerful. Powerful enough that when the time was right I could dismantle Marcus Thorne piece by piece. Why are you telling me this? Alara whispered. Why me? The G650 banked gently as it climbed, breaking through the clouds into a sudden blinding expanse of blue sky and sunlight. The transition was jarring. Because I was at the courthouse today, Julian said. Or rather, my team was. I was waiting for the verdict. I was preparing to make Marcus an offer to buy his company, a hostile takeover he's been fighting me on for 6 months. When I heard he'd won, I was disappointed. He was secure again, untouchable. And then, he continued, I saw you, the one asset he just let walk out the door, the one person who has been inside his house, inside his life for a decade. He set his teacup down. Marcus is a creature of habit, and he's arrogant. He believes he's won. He's celebrating. But I know he has a weakness. My father's work wasn't just one algorithm. It was a platform. And Marcus, for all his bluster, is not a genius. He couldn't replicate it. He kept the original Helios source code, the proof of the theft, somewhere. A failsafe. A key. I've had teams of digital security experts, ex-Mossad, ex-CIA, try to find it. They can't. It's not on any server. It must be, Julian said, a physical object. A hard drive, a ledger, a set of keys, and it's somewhere only he would feel secure. His study, Alara breathed almost to herself. The penthouse. It's behind a biometric scanner. He calls it the sanctum. Julian's eyes lit up. A shark scenting blood. Exactly. A place no one has been inside. Except, I suspect, for you. You were his wife. You ran his houses. I organized the catering, Alara said, feeling a flush of her old shame. You did more than that, Julian countered. You curated his art collection. You vetted his staff. You managed the household budgets. You are the single greatest security breach in Marcus Thorne's life. He just doesn't know it yet. Here it was, the proposition. He's going to Ibiza for his annual victory trip, Julian said. He leaves in 2 days. He'll be gone for a week. That's our window. You want me to break into my old home? Alara was horrified. I'll go to jail. He'll kill me. You will not go to jail, Julian said flatly. And you will not be alone. I am offering you a choice, Alara. You can take the pittance he left you, which I assume is nothing, and try to rebuild a life as a social pariah. Or you can join me. You can be the architect of his downfall. You can take back not just the money, but your name, your reputation, and your power. What's in it for me? Besides revenge. I don't believe in revenge. Ms. Hayes, Julian said. Revenge is emotional. This is a transaction. I want the Helios key. It is my father's legacy, and it's the only thing that can legally destroy Marcus from the outside in. In return, I will give you a new beginning. He smiled, and this time it almost reached his eyes. I will give you $100 million seed fund. I will set you up as the head of your own foundation, art, humanitarian work, whatever you choose. I will give you the lawyers, the PR team, and the resources to paint your own narrative. I will make you so powerful that Marcus Thorne will look like a footnote in your story. He extended his hand. He took your past. I'm offering you a future. Alara looked at his outstretched hand. She thought of the rain, the cold, and the smug look on Marcus's face. She thought of Arthur Vance, a man she'd never known, destroyed by a monster she had slept next to. She took his hand. It was firm and warm. Good, Julian said, settling back into his chair. We land in 30 minutes. Then the real work begins. We are going to dismantle your old life and build a new one, a better one. Julian St. Clair's estate in the Adirondacks was less a house and more a high-tech command bunker disguised as an Amman resort. The G650 landed on a private airstrip. The main lodge, a sprawling masterpiece of glass, cedar, and steel, overlooked a private mist-covered lake. But the inside was not rustic. It was a hub. Alara was introduced to Julian's team. There was Sasha, a woman with ice-blue eyes and a background in cybersecurity that she would only describe as corporate. Dev, a former British SAS operative who was now a physical penetration specialist, and a team of lawyers who, unlike her previous ones, looked less like men and more like weapons. Alara is our in, Julian announced to them in a glass-walled conference room. She is the social key. We need to turn her into a technical one. The next 48 hours were the most intense of Alara's life. This was not a makeover. It was an unmaking. First, Sasha said, "We have to dethorn you." They started with her digital self. Sasha scrubbed her. The social media accounts Marcus's PR team had created for her, photos of her at charities, smiling benignly, were vaporized. Her personal email, her credit history. All of it was put into a deep digital freeze. "You are now a ghost," Sasha announced, "which means we can build a new you." A new encrypted iPhone was provided, new untraceable bank accounts. Then came Dev. He took her to a high-tech gymnasium. "Your husband's security system." Dev began pulling up a schematic on a massive screen. "It's a Fortress Prime Level 3. Biometrics, thermal sensors, pressure plates. Good stuff, expensive stuff, but you bought it." Alara stared. Yes, I signed the invoices. I met with the installers." "Good," Dev grinned. "That means you know its quirks. But do you know this?" He spent the next day teaching her, not martial arts, but infiltration. How to bypass a laser grid. It's not like the movies love. You don't need to be a gymnast. You just need to know the pulse and move with it. How to open a biometric lock without the owner's thumb. A little cyanoacrylate, some laser printer toner. How to defeat a sound sensor. Always move on the out-breath. Silence is about rhythm. Alara, it turned me, was a fantastic student. Her years of navigating the social minefields of the Upper East Side had made her meticulous, patient, and an expert at reading micro-expressions. "She's a natural," Dev told Julian. "She's been infiltrating places she doesn't belong for a decade. This is just a different kind of party." Finally, Julian handled the last part of her transformation, the why. He brought her to his private study. It was lined with books, not trophies. "You're not just a trophy wife, Alara," he said, handing her a tablet. "I did my research." On the screen were articles she had written before Marcus. Scholarly papers from her post-grad work at the Courtauld Institute of Art in London. Her specialization identifying forgeries in 19th century European painting. "You're an expert," Julian said. "One of the best. And Marcus used you." It was true. Her job as his wife had been to find and acquire art. He'd used her expertise to build a collection that wasn't just beautiful, it was a portfolio. He'd buy pieces on her recommendation, hold them, and then donate them to his own museums at an inflated appraisal, creating massive tax write-offs. "He used my eye," my knowledge to commit fraud." Ilara realized the words tasting like ash. "Yes," Julian said. "He turned your passion into his weapon. I'm offering you a chance to turn it back." He showed her a new set of schematics. "This is Marcus's study, the sanctum. You've been inside. Where is the one place he would hide something physical?" Ilara looked at the plans. The room was dominated by a massive climate-controlled vault. "That's where he keeps his art," she said. "A Rothko, a small Monet, and a Pollock. That vault is his pride and joy." "And the Helios key." Ilara zoomed in. Her eyes traced the room, the desk, the shelves, the fireplace. "No," she whispered. "It's not in the vault. The vault is a decoy. It's too obvious. It's for show." She thought back. Marcus in his study, a glass of Laphroaig in hand. "What did he look at? The painting," she said. "The one over the fireplace. It's a portrait of his father. A terrible gaudy painting, but he'd never let the cleaners touch it. He said it was sentimental." "He doesn't have a sentimental bone in his body," Julian stated. "Exactly," Ilara agreed. "It must be a safe, hidden behind the portrait." A slow smile spread across Julian's face. "Good. Sasha Dev, get her ready. Marcus's flight just took off from Teterboro. He's on his way to Ibiza." "It's time," Julian said to Ilara. "Are you ready to meet your old life?" Ilara looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the conference room. The woman looking back was not the broken victim from the courthouse steps. Her hair was pulled back in a severe practical knot. She wore simple black tactical gear. Her eyes were not tear-filled. They were clear-focused and cold. "I'm not going back to my old life, Julian," she said. "I'm going to end it." The penthouse at 157 was one of the most secure residential buildings in the world. But Julian St. Clair didn't operate on the same level as other people. "You can't go in the front door," Sasha explained as they sat in a high-tech surveillance van parked 2 blocks away. "The doorman, the elevators, all of it is keyed to Marcus's biometrics and he'll get an alert. So we're not going up. We're going down." The plan was audacious. Ilara, guided by Dev, would enter the building's maintenance sublevels. They had acquired the schematics. Ilara would access the dark shaft, a redundant service elevator shaft that was unmonitored. From there, Dev would rig a tactical climbing harness, and Ilara would ascend, or rather be pulled up, 75 floors to the penthouse's private service entrance. "You'll have a 2-hour window," Sasha said, fitting a discreet earpiece into Ilara's ear. "Dev is looping the building's security feed. To anyone watching, it's just an empty hallway, but the loop only lasts 120 minutes. You must be out by then." Ilara, dressed in black, her face set, just nodded. The infiltration was terrifying. The climb in the dark, dusty shaft with only Dev's voice in her ear and the whisper of the harness made her heart pound. But fear was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Service door. You're there." Dev's voice crackled. Ilara landed silently on the polished marble of the service hallway. She was in. She was inside. The penthouse was silent, a $200 million tomb. It smelled like Marcus, like Creed Aventus cologne and sterile money. She walked through the grand salon, her tactical boots silent on the stark carpet she had chosen. She passed the Fazioli piano she used to play. She felt nothing. It wasn't her home. It was just a place. She reached the study. The sanctum. "Okay, Ilara." Sasha's voice was in her ear. "Biometric panel. This is the first test. It's keyed to Marcus's print." "He's arrogant," Ilara whispered, pulling a kit from her belt. "He'll have used his primary hand, his right thumb." Working with the speed and precision Dev had taught her, she dusted the scanner. A faint, perfect thumbprint glowed. She carefully photographed it, sent the image to Sasha, who inverted and cleaned it, and then printed it onto a thin gelatin film. "Here's the tricky part," Ilara murmured. She applied the film, breathed on it to add moisture and heat, and pressed. The panel beeped. The light turned green. A heavy click echoed in the room as the vacuum-sealed door unlocked. Elara stepped inside. The sanctum was just as she remembered. Dark wood, a massive Eames chair, and the art vault. And there over the fireplace the hideous portrait of Marcus's father. "Going for the painting," she whispered. "Wait," Sasha said. "I'm picking up thermal. Someone is in the apartment, Elara. I'm seeing a heat signature in the master bedroom." Elara froze. "That's impossible. Marcus is in Ibiza." "The signature is not Marcus. It's smaller. And it's moving. Get out of there." "No," Elara said, her mind racing. "It's the vault, the art vault. It's climate controlled. The heat you're seeing is the compressor." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Elara said, her confidence surging. "It's a decoy. He's trying to make someone look there. The real prize is the painting." She walked to the fireplace. The painting was heavy. She found the quirk she'd suspected, a slight misalignment in the frame she'd noticed years ago. She pressed it. Nothing. She pressed it again. Still nothing. "It's not working," she hissed. "Calm down." Dev's voice cut in. "If it's not a physical switch, it's a sequence. You're the art expert. Look at the painting. Is there anything off in?" Elara scanned the terrible painting, the flat perspective, the dead eyes. "It's just bad art. Focus." She looked closer. The painting showed Marcus's father at a desk. On the desk were 3 objects, a pen, a small globe, and a leather-bound book. "A sequence," Elara whispered. He's at his desk. What would he do?" She touched the painting. First the pen, then the book, then the globe. A low hydraulic hiss. The painting swung open. Behind it was a small titanium Ronnie's safe with a simple digital keypad. "Okay, Sasha, I'm at the safe. Keypad, 6 digits. "We'll have to brute force it," Sasha said. "That'll take time." "No," Elara said. "I know the code." She thought back. Marcus. His ego. His origin story. "What's the date he founded Thorn Industries?" Elara asked. Sasha typed. "August 10th, 08 to 10. Elara entered 081098. The safe beeped. Access denied. "No, that's the public date," Elara said, thinking hard. "The date he stole the company from your father, Julian." She heard Julian's voice, low and intense, now patched into her earpiece. "May 22nd, 052298. Elara's fingers flew. 052298. Access granted. The safe door swung open. Elara shone her penlight inside. It was empty. No, not empty. Not a hard drive. Not a ledger. A single small, old-fashioned moleskin notebook, black and worn. "I have it," Elara breathed, grabbing the notebook. "I'm coming out." "Elara, stop." Julian's voice was suddenly frantic. "The alarm." "You tripped a silent alarm. It wasn't the keypad. It was the safe itself. It has a pressure sensor. Marcus must have been alerted. He's on a plane. He's coming back." "What? No, wait!" Sasha's voice was high with panic. "He's not coming back. He never left." "What are you talking about?" Elara whispered, backing out of the study. "The flight plan to Ibiza, it was a fake A decoy. The heat signature." "Oh, God. Elara." "The heat signature wasn't the vault. It was a person." "He's in the apartment. He's in the apartment." As Sasha's voice screamed in her ear, Elara heard a sound behind her. The slow, deliberate click of a light switch. The grand salon flooded with light. Marcus Thorne stood by the door, blocking her exit. He was not in swim trunks. He was in a silk robe, holding a glass of scotch. And he was smiling. "Hello, darling," he drawled. "You've been very, very busy. Did you really think it would be that easy?" Ilara's blood turned to ice. Julian, Sasha, Dev. Their voices were a frantic cacophony in her ear, but they sounded a million miles away. Ilara, get out. Now. Run to the terrace. Marcus sipped his scotch, his smile widening. He looked utterly relaxed. Oh, don't bother listening to your little friends in the van, Ilara. The entire penthouse is a Faraday cage. Your comms are spotty at best. I let you think you were clever. He was right. The voices in her ear dissolved into static. She was alone. Again. How? She whispered, her hands, which had been so steady, now trembling. She clutched the moleskin notebook to her chest. How? Marcus laughed, a genuinely amused sound. Because I made you Ilara. I found you when you were a broke art history student. I gave you a life. Did you think I wouldn't know your every move? You knew Julian was watching you. St. Clair. Marcus's face darkened for a split second. He's been a gnat at my ear for 20 years. Of course I knew. I knew he was tracking my digital footprint. So I created a new one just for him. I leaked the Ibiza flight plan. I let his team discover the dark shaft. I wanted him to find you. I wanted him to send you. How else could I get you to violate your NDA and commit a felony all in one night? He set his glass down and walked toward her. I get to have you arrested for breaking and entering. I get to sue Julian St. Clair for corporate espionage. And I get to take back what's mine. He lunged for the notebook. But Ilara was not the same woman he'd divorced. Dev's training kicked in. She didn't fight him, she moved. She pivoted, using his own momentum against him, and slammed the heavy notebook against the side of his head. Marcus roared, not in pain, but in shock. He stumbled, catching himself on the Fazioli piano. It let out a dissonant, crashing chord. You hit me, he sputtered, outraged. You should have left me in the rain, Ilara screamed. She ran not for the service door, but for the Grand Salon's main elevator. It's biometrically sealed, you idiot, he yelled, scrambling after her. Ilara didn't slow down. She reached the elevator, slammed the call button, and then smashed the glass of the fire alarm next to it. A deafening shrill wail filled the penthouse. Red lights began to strobe. The building alarms. Marcus paled. The fire department. The police. They'll be here in minutes. What have you done? I've created a new exit, Ilara shouted. The fire alarm had triggered a building-wide override. The elevator biometrics were bypassed. The doors dinged open. Ilara threw herself inside. Marcus was right behind her. He dove into the elevator just as the doors were closing, tackling her. The notebook flew from her grasp, skittering into the corner of the elevator. They landed in a heap. The elevator, now on its emergency fire recall, began its rapid descent to the lobby. Marcus, his hair mussed, his silk robe torn, was on top of her. He was scrambling for the notebook. Ilara kneed him in the groin. He gasped, collapsing. She grabbed the notebook. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. The lobby. It was chaos. Doormen, tenants in bathrobes. And two men who were definitely not tenants. They were in dark suits, standing by the entrance, clearly annoyed by the alarm. But when they saw Marcus Thorne, disheveled, clutching his groin in a silk robe, they froze. Marcus saw them, and his face went from white to ashen. Mr. Volkov, he stammered, pulling his robe closed. This is just a misunderstanding. The man named Volkov, who had a shaved head and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, did not look amused. His eyes, the color of dead chips of ice, traveled from Marcus to Ilara, who was clutching the notebook. You call us here for urgent meeting, Thorne, Volkov said, his voice a gravelly Russian growl. You say, crisis. This is crisis you play with. Wife. She's not my wife, Marcus yelped. She's a thief. She stole from me. Volkov's partner. A younger, equally terrifying man stepped forward. Ilara's mind, now in hyperdrive, was piecing things together. Julian had been wrong. This was so much bigger. Marcus hadn't been fighting a hostile takeover from Julian. He was fighting a hostile takeover from everyone. Thorne Industries was failing. The investors he'd been courting at his party, they weren't Goldman Sachs. They were the Bratva, the Russian mafia. This was the meeting Marcus had stayed for. He was trying to get a loan, a bailout from the most dangerous men in the city. Volkov's icy eyes landed on the moleskin in Ilara's hand. "What is in book?" "Nothing," Marcus shrieked. "It's nothing, just old notes." "He lies," Ilara said, her voice shaking but clear. She stood up, pulling her tactical gear straight. She looked directly into Volkov's dead eyes. "My name is Ilara Hayes. This man, my ex-husband, is a fraud. And this is his real ledger." "Give me the book, Ilara," Marcus snarled, lunging again. "Niet," Volkov said, and his younger partner simply stuck out a hand, catching Marcus by the throat and slamming him against the elevator's marble wall. Marcus gurgled, his feet dangling. Volkov walked calmly over to Ilara. He was a mountain of a man. The smell of expensive cologne and something metallic like copper rolled off him. He held out his hand. "Book, please." Ilara looked at Marcus, choking. She looked at the flashing red lights. She heard the distant wail of sirens. She was trapped. She had a choice. Give the book to the police and it would vanish into an evidence locker where Marcus's lawyers would bury it. Give it to Marcus and she was dead. Or she handed the notebook to Volkov. "This book," she said, thinking faster than she ever had in her life, "is a record. It details how Marcus Thorne has been using a shell company, Helios Logistics, to move your money. It shows how he's been cooking his books for 5 years. He's not just broke, he's been stealing from you." It was a complete wild-eyed fabrication, a guess, but it was the only card she had. Volkov took the notebook. He didn't open it. He just stared at her. His eyes were unreadable. He then looked at Marcus, who was now purple. He nodded to his partner, who dropped Marcus to the floor. Marcus crumpled, gasping. "You," Volkov said to Ilara, "are very smart, or very stupid. We will see." He tucked the notebook into his suit jacket. The sirens were deafening now. The first fire truck was pulling up. "You, come with us," Volkov said to Ilara. "No," a new voice shouted. The lobby doors burst open. It was Graves, Julian's security man. He was flanked by Dev. They were not in tactical gear. They were in their sharp Savile Row suits. They did not look like security. They looked like management. "Mr. Volkov," Graves said, his voice polite but unyielding. "Ms. Hayes is a client of our employer. She will be coming with us." Volkov's partner put his hand inside his jacket. Dev, in response, simply flicked open his own jacket, revealing a Glock in a shoulder holster. And something else. A small laminated ID. Volkov's eyes narrowed. He recognized the ID. Ilara didn't know what it was, but it wasn't CIA. It was something different. Something financial. Volkov stared at Graves. Graves stared back. It was a standoff between two apex predators. Finally, Volkov gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "She is smart," he said, tapping the notebook in his pocket. "We will be in touch about this." He and his partner turned and walked calmly out a side door, melting into the chaos just as the firefighters stormed in. Graves put a steadying hand on Ilara's arm. "Ms. Hayes, let's go. We have a problem." The surveillance van was gone. Graves and Dev bundled Ilara into the back of a black Mercedes S-Class that had been waiting. "Where's Julian?" Ilara demanded, her adrenaline starting to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-rattling chill. "Airborne." Graves said, his eyes scanning the street as the car sped away. He's on his way back. He's displeased. Displeased, Alara said, her voice rising. I was nearly killed. Marcus was there. And who the hell was Volkov? What was on that ID, Dev? Dev in the front seat looked back. Mr. St. Clair. He has a very diverse portfolio. Let's just say some of his interests overlap with the U.S. Treasuries. We have friends. We have a bigger problem, Graves cut in. You gave the notebook to Volkov. I gave it to the man who wasn't choking me, Alara shot back. It was either him or the fire department. I made a choice. You made the right choice, said a voice from the car's speaker system. Julian. He was on a satellite call. But you've also complicated things, Alara. You gave a shark the one thing he didn't know. He was looking for proof. I guessed, Alara admitted. I told him it was a ledger showing Marcus was stealing from him. There was a long pause. Alara, Julian said, his voice strange. The moleskin. It wasn't the Helios code. Sasha's team did a full digital sweep of the van. We were recording your audio, and we got a high-resolution snapshot of the notebook just as you opened it. Sasha's been running a translation. Translation? It was in English. No, Julian said. The main text. It was in code, a simple substitution cipher. But the handwriting, that's what we focused on. It wasn't Marcus's. It wasn't his father's. Then whose was it? It was Arthur Vance's, Julian said. It was my father's diary. The Helios key wasn't a hard drive. It was his journal, the one he kept in the last 6 months of his life. Ilara's mind reeled. But why would Marcus have it? And why in his sanctum? Because... Julian's voice was heavy with a dawning, terrible realization. It wasn't just his father who was a partner. Marcus's father, David Thorne, and my father, Arthur Vance, and a third man. They were all partners. A third man. Mikhail Volkov, Julian said. Mr. Volkov's father. They built the original company together with seed money from the Bratva Old Guard in Brighton Beach. My father was the brains. David Thorne was the salesman, and Mikhail Volkov was the muscle. The pieces slammed into place for Ilara. Marcus and his father didn't just steal the company from your father. Ilara pieced it together. They squeezed everyone out. They betrayed your father, and they betrayed the mafia. Yes, Julian said. My father's diary. It wasn't just about the code. It was a ledger, a record of all the money the original Volkov had laundered through the company. Marcus wasn't keeping it as a trophy. He was keeping it as blackmail, insurance. If you ever come after me, he was telling Volkov, I'll release this and prove your family's origin story too. He was protecting himself. And tonight, Ilara finished horrified. I didn't just hand Volkov a ledger. I handed him the ledger, the one that implicates his own family, and proves Marcus has been holding out on him. You've started a war, Ilara, Julian said. Volkov has the notebook. He'll interrogate Marcus. He'll find out the truth. And when he does, he will want the notebook. And its author's son, gone. And he will want the witness who read it, you, gone as well. The car sped through the night. Graves, Julian commanded. Take her to the G6 and 50. Get her out of the country, now. No, Ilara said. The car, Graves, even the satellite call went silent. What did you say? Julian asked. I said no. Ilara repeated, her voice gathering strength. I'm not running. Not again. I've spent the last 10 years running. I'm done. Ilara, this isn't a divorce hearing. These are not lawyers. Volkov will kill you. And you, Ilara said. He'll kill you too. He'll kill Marcus. He'll scrub the whole thing unless we get to him first. Get to him? He's a businessman, Julian, Ilara insisted. A violent, terrifying businessman. But he wants something. He wants control of Thorn Industries. He wants the money Marcus stole. He doesn't want his family's dirty laundry all over the Wall Street Journal. What are you proposing? Julian's voice was wary. We don't run, Alara said, her eyes meeting Graves's in the rearview mirror. We negotiate. You and I. We go to Volkov. We offer him a deal he can't refuse. He has the book. He has all the leverage. He has a book, Alara countered. He doesn't know how to use it. He doesn't know the shell companies. He doesn't know where the offshore accounts are. I do. I was the one who on Marcus's orders signed the incorporation papers for his art holding companies in the Cayman Islands. I'm the key, and you have the one thing he needs to make it all legit. You have a name. You're Julian St. Clair. You can make a hostile takeover clean. She's right, sir, Graves said, his voice low. Running now. We'll be looking over our shoulder for the rest of our lives. We have to end this, on our terms. A long, crackling silence on the line. The S-Class was now heading downtown toward the dark glass towers of the financial district. All right, Alara. Julian's voice was hard as diamond. You want a war? We'll give them a war. Graves' change of plans. We're not going to the airport. We're going to my other office. The one under the stock exchange. He took a breath. Alara, you just walked out of a courtroom. You survived your husband. You survived a 75-story infiltration. And you survived the Bratva. Now, are you ready to become a billionaire? The next 12 hours were a masterclass in high-stakes corporate warfare. Julian's other office was a subterranean bunker, a trading floor that dealt not just in stocks but in power. Sasha, I want every digital asset of Thorn Industries frozen, now. Dev, I want a security detail on Marcus. I want to know where Volkov is interviewing him. Alara, Julian said, turning to her. You and I, we're going to write a new story. Alara, fueled by coffee and a burning righteous fury, sat with Julian's legal team. She mapped it all out. The shell companies. The donations. The fake Monet Marcus had sold to a rival using her appraisal as cover. By 4 Soru a.m., they had a dossier that would not just end Marcus Thorn, it would disintegrate him. By 5 Soru a.m., Dev reported in. Got him. Volkov has Marcus at the old Red Hook shipping terminal, the one his father used to run. Very poetic. By 6 Soru a.m., a call came. A blocked number. Julian answered. It was Volkov. Your client is very smart, the Russian said. This book, it is a problem. For everyone. It's not a problem, Mr. Volkov, Julian said, his voice smooth as silk. It's a negotiation. He's at the terminal, Julian said to Alara. He wants to meet. He wants to clean this. He's going to kill us all, Alara said. No, Julian said. He's a businessman. He'll kill one person, the one who's the most liability. Right now, that's Marcus. Soon it could be us. We have to change the math. How? Julian smiled. We're not going to the Red Hook terminal. We're bringing him to our territory, and we're going to bring a much bigger gun. The meeting was set for 900 a.m., not in a dark warehouse, on the 101st floor observation deck of Hudson Yards. Public, high, no place to hide a body. Alara and Julian were waiting, the wind whipping around the glass partition, the entirety of New York spread out beneath them. Volkov arrived flanked by 2 men. He looked tired and angry. You, he said to Julian, your father was a fool. He was, Julian agreed. He trusted the wrong people. And you, he said to Alara, you are a problem. I'm a solution, Alara said, her voice not wavering. I have the book, Volkov said. I have Thorn. I have everything. No, Julian said. You have a story, a messy one that implicates your family in money laundering, fraud, and God knows what else. You have a failing company in Thorn Industries, which as of 800 a.m. is under federal investigation. Volkov's eyes narrowed. I called the SEC, Julian said. I gave them part of the story, enough to freeze every asset. Thorn Industries is worthless. The company you killed for is now a paperweight. Volkov's hand twitched. You have nothing, Julian continued, except that notebook, which is now evidence in a federal case. What do you want? Volkov growled. Here's the deal, Ilara said, stepping forward. We give you a new story, a clean one. She laid it out. Julian's St. Clair Capital will absorb the good assets of Thorn Industries, the logistics, the tech, and a prepackaged bankruptcy. It's clean. It's legal. Why do I care? Volkov spat. Because Julian said, in return you get what you always wanted. 50% ownership of the new holding company. No more Bratva shell games. You will be a legitimate 50% owner of a global logistics firm. Your name, your family's name, will be on the Forbes list, not an FBI watch list. Volkov was stunned. You would partner with me. My father partnered with your father, Julian said. This is just finishing the deal. As for the bad assets, the fraud, the theft, all of that stays with the Thorn Industries name, and with its CEO. Marcus, Ilara said, is the new story. He's the only villain. He defrauded his partners. He defrauded his investors, you. He defrauded his wife. He takes the fall. For everything. Volkov looked at Ilara, then at Julian. He was being offered a kingdom cleaned and pressed. All he had to do was give up one man. He's at Red Hook. Volkov said, a cold smile touching his lips. He has been very talkative. A full confession. It's all recorded. I'm sure it is, Julian said. The SEC will be very interested in that recording. Volkov nodded. The notebook. It belongs to the son of its author, Julian said. Volkov reached into his pocket and handed the moleskin to Julian. The deal was done. Ilara stood alone on the tarmac at Teterboro, the same tarmac she had arrived on just 2 days prior. It felt like a lifetime. The G650 was waiting, its engines humming. You're sure you don't want to come? Julian asked. He was holding the moleskin. My family's old home in Florence. It's quiet. You could decompress. Ilara looked at the jet. It was an escape. It was a golden cage. That's your story, Julian, she said, turning to him. Your father's legacy. You're going to go read that, and you're going to find peace. Or you're going to find a new war. But it's yours. And you, Ilara. What's your story? Ilara looked back toward the city. Marcus is in federal custody. Volkov is cleaning up the business. My old life is a crater. I'm not the woman who walked out of that courthouse. And I'm not the woman who got on your jet. Who are you then? Ilara smiled. It was the first real smile she'd had in a decade. I'm Ms. Hayes, the art expert. You promised me a $100 million foundation. I have a lot of fake art to find, and I think I know exactly where Marcus donated all the real pieces. Julian laughed, a real warm laugh. He'll hate that. I know, she said. Julian nodded and walked up the steps of his jet. He paused at the door. You know, Ilara, I was never inviting you into my jet. I was just giving you a lift. You were always the one flying the plane. The door closed. Ilara Hayes stood on the tarmac alone. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't lonely. She pulled out her new phone, the one Sasha had given her, and dialed her new legal team. This is Ilara Hayes, she said as the Gulfstream rocketed into the sky. Let's get to work. She started with nothing, lost everything, and ended up with a power she never knew she had. The world is full of people like Marcus who think they own the rules. But they forget about the Ilaras, the quiet ones, the ones they underestimate. The ones who, when pushed, don't just get back up, they learn to fly. What did you think of Alara's story? Was her final move against Marcus and Volkov brilliant or just plain dangerous? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you loved this story of drama, revenge, and ultimate triumph, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a story of strength, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell. We have new stories coming every week, and you won't want to miss a single one.